Well, in fact, this summit, we are just trying to show to the people that, in fact, what the IPCC claims is far from being settled science, that there is a lot of things which are not, in fact, properly understood in the climate science, and therefore that all the conclusions that are being reached by the IPCC are actually flawed conclusions.
Okay, and you're an expert in chemistry. We've heard a lot about carbon dioxide, this evil molecule pollution that's going to destroy us all. I was wondering, what are your thoughts on this?
Well, I worked a lot on carbon dioxide, and I can tell you one thing, carbon dioxide is not a poison. Let's start with something very simple. It is not a poison. Carbon dioxide is actually food for plants. People seem to have forgotten that. But without carbon dioxide, plants cannot grow. Without plants, there would be no human life on Earth. Now, the plants, the greens, the grocery, they need carbon dioxide to be able to grow better, bigger, and to resist to invasions by microorganisms and all that. Now, people also forget that most of the oxygen we are breathing comes from carbon dioxide. Tiny little microorganisms living in the ocean called phytoplanktons eat carbon dioxide and release oxygen.
Okay, and so if the UN succeeds in creating a global carbon price or tax or anything, what will that do for the climate?
Well, the worst thing that can happen is decreasing the amount of carbon dioxide in the air. One has to realize that actually most of the plants living nowadays are hungry. They are hungry towards carbon dioxide. You know, when you have a greenhouse, you pump in there at least 3 times the amount of carbon dioxide present in our atmosphere. Under those conditions, plants grow better, bigger, faster, and the best thing of all is they use far less water. So the worst thing that can happen is reducing the amount of carbon dioxide. Now, at the moment, there is absolutely not one single physical scientific evidence, I repeat, not one single physical scientific evidence that shows that carbon dioxide emitted by human beings has any effect whatsoever on the temperature of our Earth. Not one proof of evidence.
Okay, well, so what's this whole summit about then? They're telling us that carbon dioxide is pollution and we need to stop it or we're all going to be in trouble. So what is the real agenda then? Well,
the real agenda is in fact to be able to find a culprit. And the culprit is carbon dioxide. And if you have a culprit, you of course have someone behind it who's the faulty of that. So the human being is in fact the guy who generates this noxious, nasty chemical. This is almost like a religion, you know. You have the original sin. The original sin is carbon dioxide. The one who committed is the human being. So we all have to repent. This is basically the message which is given there. It's a new religion going on. This, and we call it climatism around here. And that new religion is there to make sure that people, in fact, will pay for that. You will pay for carbon dioxide. You will pay for heating your home. You will pay for everything that touches far or close to climate. Now, what is behind this is not just that. It's a slow, gentle erosion of your own freedom, of your own individual liberty. That's what is at stake with COP21.
Okay, so what would be then the best thing that could happen at COP21 for humanity, I guess, let's say?
Well, what is happening at the moment, COP21 is going to be a massive failure, and we can all rejoice about that. It's going to be a massive failure because most of the big countries who want to come out of poverty, who are on the ascent to have a living standard similar to ours, will never ever abide by these rules. Absolutely no way. Now, that means that rich countries, or allegedly rich countries, will have to give them a lot of money. Now, to give that in perspective, the Kyoto Protocol cost us every year $150 billion. UNICEF said if we give them $70 to $80 billion per year, which is nearly half of what we give for the Kyoto Protocol, they will make sure that everyone in the third world will have running water, electricity, food, and education. Well, the choice between the two is quite simple. I'd rather give my money to help people come out of poverty and live by modern standards than to throw the money to people who do nothing to solve a problem which does not exist.
Okay. You know, I've talked to a number of scientists who've said that also, and I talked to some on the IPCC who resigned and said it was a disgrace, but there are still a good number of scientists out there who say that CO2 is going to kill us and we need a UN global warming regime or otherwise it's climate crisis. How do they get some of these scientists to play along with this agenda?
Well, there's several reasons. Scientists need money to do science. And so if you want to have research grants, you have to abide by the actual current dogma. If you don't do that, you will never never be funded. Now, it transpires that I don't have access to this kind of research funding, so I don't care at all. I can express myself quite clearly about that. But many of my colleagues need that amount of money. And so they have to go along the lines of the current climate change dogma. The other part are climate scientists who really believe in that, because either they are convinced that there is a real danger for humanity, which is something understandable, or they are part of this kind of new climatism religion. And there are finally the silent majority, the people who do not believe at all in that, but who do not have the courage to come out of the wood, and they just bend their back and they wait until the situation clears up later on, and then they move to something else.
Okay, so for an everyday person on the street who doesn't have maybe a science background, doesn't have any PhD or degrees, how can they find for themselves who is telling the truth, the IPCC or the people who disagree with the IPCC?
Well, the first rule of thumb is never believe the United Nations and never believe the IPCC. That's one thing. The second thing is the world has gone through far warmer temperatures than now. You have only to think about the medieval warm period that happens around the year 1000 and so on. Think about the Roman period, think about all the times where the temperature of this planet was much higher than now. This is when civilization flourished, not when it was cold. So we are way below that in terms of temperature. So there is absolutely nothing to worry about. So the normal citizen, everyone, they should just don't worry about it. It doesn't mean you have to pollute. We're not talking about the same thing. Climate change and environment are two very different things to discuss about. Environment is important, ecology is important, respect of your environment, try not to throw everything everywhere. This is something which every one of us can do. We have our share in the surrounding about us. We have to do something to maintain a good standards of living, but that has nothing to do with climate change, nothing to do with the temperature of the earth. We humans are so small that we have nothing, we cannot impinge, we cannot play on that.
Okay, and so what would you say to Americans? What should they be doing about this? People who are watching this video, should they take some action? What can they do to maybe bring some sanity back to the world?
Well, the one thing they have to really fight for is their individual freedom. They have to watch, because behind all this you have a huge army of technocrats, and these people are slowly, gradually eroding every one of your private liberty. They will decide what you will eat, how much you will eat, how many hours you can go outside, if you can fly a plane once a year or not. This is in their boxes. This is something that they are thinking about. To give you an idea, here in the European Union, there is a group of people thinking about how much meat every human being in Europe will be allowed to eat per day. So far, we are at 75 grams of beef per day. Well, if I like to have a half a pound or a 1 pound steak, I may not be able to do that if this kind of law and legislation goes through. So please, remember, the first thing among everything is your own private freedom. You have to fight for that.